Okay, I was asked to do something of a recap podcast or episode about this season of Survivor and give my perspectives from a strategic standpoint, from a Survivor lover standpoint. I'm going to try to do my best. I'm going to try to be brief at the same time, but I'll try to quickly go through and analyze different people's games and how they did. To start off with, so Megan was our first boot. She was on the Contenders tribe, which consisted of Jonathan, Neil, Hannah, Charlie, and her. First vote, Neil's immune, so he can't be voted for. Jonathan plays an idol and excuses himself from voting. So we're talking about 4 votes. It seemed like they were all over the place. Megan played her shot in the dark, which showed that she didn't really have trust in how the votes might have shaken out. Hannah voted for Megan. Charlie voted for Hannah, and Neil voted for Charlie. So it was a 1-1 tie. Megan's shot in the dark didn't hit. They go to the tiebreaker, and Megan loses in lawn darts. So honestly, not a ton to analyze here. I think clearly there wasn't really any major alliances on the tribe, and everybody felt a little uneasy going in. And Megan, I don't think it was a mistake to play her shot in the dark there. Next elimination was Emily Johnson. She was on the Champions tribe with her husband Kyle, Evan, Mackenzie, and Emily, the other Emily. And the first vote was a 2-2-1 vote. It was the 2 votes for Emily were from Kyle and Evan, and the 2 votes for Evan were from Mackenzie and Emily. And then there was a stray vote for Mackenzie that came from Emily Butts, I believe. So we go to tiebreaker, and Emily loses to Evan in the darts. And really, I don't think that there's much that Emily could have done. I guess really Emily Johnson needed to pull in Emily Butts to be a more secure ally. That's the one thing. But again, when it's this early in the game, you can't really criticize anybody going out because you've had like 10 minutes to make alliances and talk game. I will have to give Kyle props, though. He pulled in Evan really quickly as an ally, and that seemed to be the difference and kind of what saved Evan ultimately in this first early on round. Next, we had the Contenders tribe going back to tribal, so Jonathan, Neil, Charlie, and Hannah. And let's see here. We had then Hannah went out at that point, and they all agreed to do a thing where they each voted one for each other. So basically they declined to do a vote. So Hannah basically went out just on the tiebreaker. And, I think that, again, just early in the game, people were really reluctant to vote for each other. And so as a result, Hannah went out in a tiebreaker challenge. Then we had... Okay, picking back up where I left off because I had to check what the boot order was. But next we had Sam who went out. So the challengers went to tribal, and it was pretty clear that there was a 4-person alliance of Brett, Jacob, Taylor, and Rachel with Sam and Katie on the outside. So Sam got eliminated in a 4-1 vote. I really thought that Sam would go a lot further. It's no diss to Sam. It's just Survivor is unpredictable in that way. But I really thought that the 2 people, Jacob and Brett, who work together but are on the outs from the rest of the 4 who knew each other previously, I figured it would be those 2 who would be in danger of getting out first. So it was a surprise to me that initially Sam and Katie were the 2 on the outs. But, obviously Sam probably thought he had the majority. I'm assuming he thought maybe he had Taylor and Rachel. Obviously he didn't. And as a result, we see Sam go. And this marks the first time in the game that Katie votes for Jacob. I think a fun fact is that every single tribal, except for one, when Katie had the opportunity to vote for Jacob, she did vote for Jacob, which is just kind of a funny note that I realized when I was going back and editing all of this. But I think when later on in the game, when Neil got voted out, Katie voted for Neil on that round, but it was the one time that she didn't vote for Jacob throughout the game. I don't think that there's any beef or anything. It just was a funny observation that I had. Let's see here. Okay, then next we had Jonathan, who was eliminated, again, the Contenders tribe just like refused to engage in strategy, so they again just defaulted to they're all going to vote for each other one time so they could go to a tiebreaker, and Jonathan lost in lawn darts. Some of these early ones I'm not really applying much thought to, because it's really just that they lost in a lawn darts tiebreaker and there's not really much strategy to break down, so I just can't go too deep on it. Next, we had Katie, who was eliminated in a 4-1 vote. Not too surprising, considering that in the previous round, Sam got voted out, and they were sort of thick as thieves. Obviously, they're dating, so at that point, Katie was in a tough spot, and the four that voted together the previous round again persisted and voted Katie out. So let's see here. At that point, we had Megan, Emily, Hannah, Jonathan, Sam, and Katie had all gone out. So then we did a swap to 2 teams of 5, and we had one team where it was, I believe, sort of the hodgepodge tribe, and this is the challenge the tribal council where everybody either had immunity or played an idol except for Taylor. It was 3 winners, Charlie and Taylor. So Taylor got a pretty bad tribe swap in that, he had a group of 4, which was at that time at least tied for the biggest tribe, and 3 of them went on to a different team, and Taylor by himself was put on the team with 3 winners and Charlie. So, but even still, Taylor got out by default because he didn't have an idol. If the tribe swap goes differently, honestly, Taylor was set up in a really good spot, but I guess that's the detriment of him not having found an idol during the course of the day. Then on the other side of things, we had 3 Browns, Brett, Jacob, and Rachel, who it seemed, obviously they had set up a really tight pact with the 3 of them and Taylor, but with just the 3 of them on that tribe, it was going to stay strong. And then they were also paired with Neil and Mackenzie, and it seems like they had favored Neil to work with. And again, I'm speculating, but it seems like maybe for challenge prowess, and also there was like an anti-winner sentiment. So they were fine with getting rid of Mackenzie. I believe she went out in a 4-1 vote. So then we had our re-enter the game challenge. And so we had tug of war. I know it was controversial that there was only one opportunity to get back in the game, and I let the contestants make up the tug of war teams. Sorry to those who lost this challenge. I was trying to think of a way to keep people involved, and letting the contestants themselves make up the teams seemed like a way to do it, but there's no equitable way to let people in, honestly, with the tug of war challenge, because just naturally one team's going to be stronger than the other. But we had the tribe of Mackenzie, Sam, Katie, and Taylor get back in the game, and they were going to be their own tribe from that point on. So then we went back from 8 people left in the game up to 12. Now let me think here about who went out next. I believe next out was, let's see here. Okay, so then next we had the Hodgepodge tribe go back to tribal. This was the 3 winners of Evan, Emily, and Kyle, and they were on a tribe with Charlie. And actually, this is surprising. I thought it would be a simple 3-1 for Charlie, and the winners would stick together. But it actually really turned into Evan and Kyle versus Charlie and Emily. And so in the preceding tribal that they went to, it was 2 votes Kyle, 2 votes Kyle, 1 vote Charlie. And then Kyle actually didn't vote because he played a shot in the dark because he figured the rest might be going for him. So on paper, it's 2, and the shot in the dark didn't hit. So on paper, it's 2 votes Kyle, 1 vote Charlie. But then out of the nowhere from the top rope, Evan plays an idol for Kyle. So Charlie goes home in a bizarre 1-0 vote in which there were 4 people and really only one vote ends up counting. So again, Kyle locking down Evan early in the day really comes through because it's the difference between Kyle getting, let's see here, Kyle getting 11th place, and then he ultimately stayed in and got about 7th place. So he really furthered his day by ultimately securing that Evan alliance early on. The next tribal we had was, and for Charlie, he actually played this game pretty optimally. The fact that he's in a 3-1 disadvantage and he actually swings Emily to his side, a very good move. Charlie basically played the optimal game. Really, what could he have done more? Maybe he could have swayed Evan as well, but it seemed like Evan and Kyle were really locked in as a duo, and so, I can't fault Charlie. This should have been a layup of a Charlie elimination. The fact that it was a lot closer and more bizarre of an outcome than it could have been, really got to give some props to Charlie for making the best of a very tough situation to find himself in. Then we had Taylor. Taylor was on that re-enter tribe with Mackenzie, Sam, and Katie. And on paper, we have 3 people from the Challengers or the Brown tribe versus Mackenzie from the Winners tribe. So you'd say to yourself, okay, it's probably going to be Mackenzie. She's on the outs. But earlier in the day, in sort of like an off-to-the-side confessional, Sam had said he was out for blood for all the Browns for not only voting him out, but also voting his dearly beloved out. So I think Taylor, even though he got back in the game, the guy was pretty much dead man walking the first time that tribe went to tribal. Of course, he didn't have a idol at all. He did actually play a shot in the dark, which was smart because if he had not played the shot in the dark, it would have been 3-1 against him. So it was 3-0, and then he played a shot in the dark to try and save himself. It obviously didn't work, so unfortunately Taylor was out at that point. Again, a player who, based on his initial tribe, was set up really well, but swaps can really screw you over, and Taylor's probably the ultimately swap-screwed player in this whole game because he got eliminated on the first swap, and then in technically something of like a second swap, he again got eliminated based on players he had already voted out coming back to bite him in the butt. So Taylor, you played a good enough game, but it's just you got dealt a really tough hand. Next, we had the Hodgepodge tribe, which again was just really the 3 winners left of Evan, Kyle, and Emily. And I'm surprised at this point because Kyle and Evan, and from my standpoint, had the clear 2-1 majority and could have voted out Emily. But they still, maybe to save face or to be equitable, I don't know what, but instead of just doing the layup vote of 2-1, Evan convinces the other 2 to go to lawn darts as a tiebreaker. So this is kind of a massive pivot from Evan, who I think was sitting pretty and was sort of the deciding vote between Kyle and Emily. But he's the one that vouches that they go to lawn darts, and then he loses in the lawn darts challenge. So it shows that you never really know what's going to happen. Evan, was in a good spot, but he got a little tricky with it, and as a result, found himself out of the game. Next tribal we had was Sam, Mackenzie, and Katie. So again, on paper, you'd think a simple tribal council of Sam and Katie vote together to get Mackenzie out because they're a couple. And in a shocking turn of events, Katie gets flipped by Mackenzie to vote against her own boyfriend. And Mackenzie really pulls a half measure here because she makes an impassioned plea to Katie to get Sam out. And then she doesn't vote for Sam, though. She plays her shot in the dark. So, I guess Mackenzie figured that her plea was not good enough to have swayed Katie. So sort of as a half measure, she also plays her shot in the dark, forfeiting her own vote. So we get another kind of bizarre. Sam votes for Mackenzie as expected. Katie votes for Sam, which is pretty unexpected. And then Mackenzie doesn't back up her own plea to Katie, forfeits her vote for the shot in the dark. So it's a tie 1-1. And we go to tiebreaker, and the real shakeup is then that Sam gets eliminated because he loses to Mackenzie in the tiebreaker. So Really unfortunate for Sam, loyal to a fault. That's why the episode's called Loyal to a Fault. Is minutes before tribal council, he says he's pretty certain that him and Katie will vote for Mackenzie. He's not worried about it, and he says no matter what, he's not voting for Katie, which, you know, gotta hand it to the guy to staying loyal to his girlfriend, but it's basically what cost him the entire game. So Sam, while you have the moral victory, you have the survivor defeat. Okay, then we're at 8 people and we're merging. And at this point, there had been a lot of talk of the sexism thing around the day. I think it really started from the first 3 people out on the day were women. If we're being real, it's not really sexist because it was all in tiebreaker challenges. They weren't actually even voted for. So, the sexism theme kind of got an artificial start to it anyways. But regardless, it was just it was a thing that was leaking its way into the day. And I think it really, like the gasoline on the bonfire here was, we had the Big Brother round where if you win the challenge, you get to pick the only 2 people that can possibly be voted for. And Brett votes or puts up Katie and Mackenzie as the only 2 people who could be voted for. Now, this is a really interesting turn of events because in the previous round, Katie brings Mackenzie into the merge with her. And I'm not going to, Katie was not very familiar with Survivor. In that position, I don't know. I probably would have brought Sam with me if I have my significant other and he says to the camera, "There's no way I ever vote for Katie." That's a pretty dang good person to have in your pocket. Of course, we, the audience, knew that Sam said that. Katie did not know that he said that. And to be fair to Katie, Mackenzie did make the point of, if you stick with Sam the whole time, you'll be viewed as a duo. Sam may get a lot of credit for the moves that you pull off or the progress that you make, whereas if you vote Sam out, you're kind of striking out on your own path and you'll get more of the credit for the moves you make. So kind of a tricky situation for Katie in that, you could argue she made the right move either way, but when you get into the merge, it seemed like Brett was very keen on getting winners out, and the whole Brown Challengers tribe was pretty keen on getting winners out right away. So I guess the Brown tribe minus Katie because she had been separated from them for a while. And so she goes, Brett puts up Katie and Mackenzie, and Mackenzie goes out in a basically unanimous vote. Because I think, again, the winner sentiment was strong throughout the day, and the Brown tribe wanted to try and, bring Katie back into the fold to, be on their side, which I think them all basically unanimously voting Mackenzie out helped because Katie probably looked at Mackenzie as her number 1 at that point in the game, and getting Mackenzie out kind of left Katie in a tough spot of basically needing to go back with the Challengers tribe and to just preserve herself. So, when we came into the merge, on paper, there's 4 challengers, 3 winners, and Neil, who was a contender. So in theory, you have 4 challengers versus 4, let's just call them other. And the big thing is that the challengers trio of Rachel, Brett, and Jacob had swapped with Neil. And they pulled in Neil basically right away. The first vote, they voted Mackenzie out, and that sort of gave Neil confidence in them. They kept reassuring him throughout the game. You'll see it in confessionals and whatnot. They make a big deal of securing Neil. And Neil's loyal to them. Neil's loyal to the end. Specifically, it seemed like to Jacob and Brett, Neil was like locked down with them. And this is a really good move by them. It really, to me, carried them through to the end game. Also, that they had, it seemed like the real core trio was Brett, Rachel, and Jacob. And then they had sort of on the periphery, but still pretty close involved, was Katie, and then to a lesser extent, Neil. And then kind of the outside was the remaining winners. And so Mackenzie goes out at 8th. 7th, this is a spot where I thought that the winners and Neil might rally a little bit and maybe try to pull Katie over to their side and flip the script on the Jacob, Brett, Rachel alliance that seemed like lock solid. But instead, there was a lot of external pressures from what I hear from Kyle Johnson's wife and others to get Kyle out of there. I think I think there was a general anti-winner sentiment this season because I formatted it the way I did. People didn't want a winner to win again, and so I think when we think about Kyle's game, it seemed like with a lot of people not even currently in the game calling for his head, and the Brown tribe in general being anti-winner, Mackenzie, Kyle, and Emily seemed like they were kind of destined to go out 8-7-6 in some way, shape, or form. So at final 7, when Emily, who has been on a starting tribe with Kyle, is the one who spearheads going for him, that really seals the deal, and I think makes it easy on the Brown tribe. They were kind of back and forth on who to go for, whether it be Kyle or even Emily or somebody else, maybe even Neil or Katie at that point. Emily volunteering up Kyle to go out pretty much sealed the deal. Kyle was a dead man walking. I don't think there's much he could have done. I will say, to the detriment of Kyle's game, when the Brown tribe point blank asks him, who should we go for? He explicitly says, I don't want to throw out a name, which, come on, dude, you got to come up with some sort of plan. You're a Survivor fanatic nearly as much as me. You know that you got to do something there. But Kyle was really drawing dead. So Kyle goes out at 7. At 6, Emily goes out. She has the right read. She says, I posed to her in a confessional with her and Neil, you're the two that are not Brown that are left. Do you feel like you're drawing dead here? And she said, I'm fairly certain it's me, which she was right about. And I'm trying to remember, but I think she did her shot in the dark at that tribal and didn't get it. So then it came down to, this is where we had to do the revote. But it came down to her versus Katie. And fun fact, Katie was actually the tiebreaker vote that had accidentally voted for Jacob. So obviously Katie's not going to, on a revote, vote for herself. So Emily goes out on a 3-2 vote. She did correctly read the room. It was the right play of the shot in the dark. She played optimally. I mean, if we're saying could she have pulled the Brown to her side, I think it would have been an uphill battle to get any of that really tight trio to her side. Somebody else did vote for Katie with her. I must have been Neil, I'm thinking, but I don't know. Then we have final 5, where it's interesting because later in the game, Jacob mentions to Brett, there's such a strong woman push. I think, to win this game, one of the guys are going to have to go to the end with the guys. And then this very round, they vote out Neil, which I was interested in. The game right around here, number 5, is where kind of the game shifts from thinking about who's a threat left to who do you want to sit at the end next to. And so I really thought that there was a chance that Jacob and Brett would pull in Neil and try to go for Rachel had won immunity at this one. So I thought that they might try to get Katie out, but they did not. I think it was sort of this push and pull of should we value what's more threatening, Neil's challenge ability or this like girl power sentiment that the jury had been promoting. And I guess they thought that Neil's challenge prowess was more threatening, and maybe they wanted to have like a clean all challengers final 4. Regardless, I think Neil had voted for Brett on this one. I think Neil maybe thought that he was the weakest link of the Brown challengers tribe. Maybe he was the one that was most on the periphery that they'd be willing to go for. He's wrong. So Neil goes out at 5th. Then at 4th, I think on paper, the clear vote out would have been Katie, because it seemed like the Jacob, Brett, Rachel alliance was really tight and they were not going to break up until they like absolutely had to. And so at that final 4 challenge where Katie wins, she makes them choose because obviously they can't take her out. So you get a lot of interesting, this is probably the strategically one of the most complex rounds we had all day, because it wasn't like a clear, it was the tribe that had ruled the day finally had to devour themselves, and they were a tight-knit group. So it seemed like Katie was open to either of the guys. It seemed like Rachel was also open to either guy. But they both had maybe a leaning towards Brett. Jacob and Brett, I think they, at this Final Four, they vocalized the whole women power, afraid to go against a girl in the end. And so that, for that reason, Brett said they verbalized, let's go for Rachel at this point. And Brett stays with that vote the rest of the game. He ends up voting for Rachel at the end in the Final Four vote. And it really comes down to Jacob, this vote. It comes down to, does Jacob want to force a tiebreaker between Brett and Rachel, or does he just want to jump on the bandwagon and go for Brett? And it would seem like ultimately Jacob was tighter with Rachel than he was with Brett, because he backs down from the tiebreaker possibility and goes with the two girls to get Brett out. When I think about it, I really, and I'm not trying to diss anybody here. They all played good, strong games. They had a tight alliance, but I felt like of the trio of Brett, Jacob, and Rachel, I thought that Brett had the worst shot of winning the thing, because he pulled that stunt where he put the two girls up for elimination and he poured gasoline on the sexism fire. And so I was surprised. I thought that Jacob would have tried anything to get to the end with Brett, because I think that he could have beat Brett. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to take the path of least resistance. Or, to be fair to Jacob, he said in Final Tribal Council that he went the way he did because if it had been a Brett versus Rachel tiebreaker and Rachel would have won, she would have held it against him in a Final Three scenario. If they would have done another challenge and Rachel would have won, Jacob thinks that Rachel would have cut him and not taken him to a Final Two, which is actually a very good read by Jacob. That very well could have happened. So, I'm selling Jacob's strategy short here. It was a fairly good move. I think the tough thing is that Brett would have brought Jacob to the end, and I don't think that, maybe Rachel would have. I guess I don't know. But Katie definitely was not bringing Jacob to the end. Her and Jacob were the least connected of the four of them. And that's why, as I mentioned earlier, it's funny that really Katie voted for Jacob at every opportunity, even at time when he had immunity. I think they just weren't close, and she viewed him as a pretty strategic threat. So they weren't working together, and she thought, what's the use of keeping him around? But and I don't, again, to clarify, there's no beef or anything. I think they got along perfectly fine. Just in the strategy of the game, I don't think they were working together. But yeah, so Jacob ultimately folds, goes with the girls, and takes Brett out with probably the least amount of blood on his hands, where he can feel like he's, on paper being loyal to two people and only breaking the promise of one. I think either way, this group was going to have a tough time at the end. And I do think that what's really a boon for Rachel's game and a positive for her is she clearly had the loyalty of Jacob, because so we get to the Final Three and we do the Tribal Council, and from the kind of informal polling I've done, if we think about who the votes ultimately went to, it was 8 Jacob and 6 Katie in the Final Two. But if it had been a Final Three like I originally teased it might have been, I think at that point, Katie actually wins the day, and it probably would have been something like 6 votes Katie, 4 votes Rachel, 4 votes Jacob. I think Rachel and Jacob both play very strategic games, but they played such closely aligned games that, throughout the entire time, they were never separated. They were on the same starting tribe, they voted the same way. They were on the same swap tribe, they voted the same way. All throughout the post-merge, they voted the same way. They were in lockstep all day strategically. They voted the same every single time, even up through the Brett vote. They both voted for him, even though they almost didn't. But it seemed like strategically, the two of them were really running the day, and it seemed like at the end, it's interesting that I don't know how it would have gone. They did a pretty good job of distinguishing themselves and how their games, they each stood out. I think and this is all speculation, but it seems we obviously know what happens in a Jacob Katie final 2. Jacob wins in a slim margin. In a final 3, I think weirdly enough, the majority of those 8 Jacob votes get split up, and Katie wins in a plurality vote. In a Katie Rachel final 2, I think probably what basically the 8 Jacob votes just get transferred over to Rachel, because again, they played such similar games and were in lockstep the whole time. I think those 8 people vote for Rachel. So Rachel probably wins in a slim margin there. And then the interesting thing is a Jacob Rachel final 2. Now I think that Rachel probably wins this. So I think a fair amount of the Katie votes, not all of them, but a chunk of them, certainly were the patriarchy, anti-man vote from the day being a little sexist or whatever. So I think probably all the Katie votes, all 6 of them, go to Rachel just off the bat. And then it's a matter of how does Jacob, how many of the 8 votes that he originally got can he still keep? I think I know at least one of them was originally going to go for Rachel, and when she got out, they went for Jacob. So in a Rachel versus Jacob, they go Rachel. So then we're talking 7 votes for Rachel off the bat, 7 votes for Jacob. And I just think that they were seen as such lockstep. Actually, 2 people told me they would have gone Rachel as the best of the final 3. So I think Rachel probably wins versus Jacob in like a 9-5 kind of vote. Really shows the intricacy of the dynamics of the final 3, that if it's a final 3, Katie wins in a plurality. If it's a final 2 with Rachel and Katie, Rachel probably wins. And if it's a final 2 with Rachel and Jacob, Rachel probably wins. So they each had a scenario kind of at this end game where they could have won. Obviously, Jacob, the scenario where he won, it seems like that was probably like the one winning scenario he had. The final 3 would have been Katie, and then if Rachel's in the final 2, it seems like no matter what, she was winning. So that's a really fun end game where it seems like each person could win in a specific scenario. That's what you want. You don't want just like one person wins against anybody else no matter what. So ultimately, Jacob makes the right call in taking Katie to the end and not taking Rachel. That was a game. That was he was really struggling with which way to go, and he made the right call ultimately. And obviously a very clutch immunity win for him to win that last one. So that's really all I got. I know that this went a little long. If you stuck the whole way through, good on you. I just wanted to do a little, I guess you'd call it a podcast, a post-game wrap-up of how did everyone play. I think overall, the early game was defined by an unwillingness to backstab, and so we had a ton of tiebreakers going on. The middle game was defined by a pretty strong anti-winner sentiment that they got extinct throughout the early game. And then, the end game was defined by some really clutch immunity wins. Katie at Final 4, super clutch, amazing win. And Jacob at the Final 3, making the game-winning victory at that bottle game. So everybody did a really good job. I thank all the participants. It was really just a great season overall. And we'll maybe see you next year.